Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story. It is Wednesday, and we are in the book of Nehemiah, chapter 4. And it begins by saying Sanballat was very angry when he learned that we were rebuilding the wall. He flew into a rage and mocked the Jews, saying in front of his friends and the Samaritan army officers, "What does this bunch of poor, feeble Jews think they're doing? Do they think they can build a wall in a single day by just offering a few sacrifices? Do they actually think they can make something of stones from rubbish heap and charred ones at that?" And so it goes on to talk. Tobiah the Ammonite says, who was standing beside him, remarked that stone wall would collapse even if a fox walked along the top of it. It says, "Then I prayed, hear us, O God, for if we are being mocked, may their scoffing fall on their own heads, and may they themselves become captives in a foreign land. Do not ignore their guilt. Do not blot out their sins, for they have provoked you to anger here in front of the builders." So they run into some opposition. It says he's not just opposition. He's angry to the point that he flies into a rage, and then he begins ridiculing them and getting other people in on the ridicule. And so the question I want to ask today is, what are some of the best ways to deal with people who are angry with you and or oppose what you're doing?
So the first thing Nehemiah did was pray,
Mm-hmm.
which
Yeah.
I think is a pretty good indication to us of what our first reaction should be. Although I think it was an angry prayer. 'Cause
Yeah,
he
well,
said-
so I would agree with that. It is he like prays a curse on them.
yeah,
God, don't forgive them. Like that's pretty much
Yeah.
what he's praying. Don't
Mhm.
forgive them. Have you ever prayed a prayer, Lord, don't forgive them?
no,
No. Have you?
I have not.
Okay.
No, I can think of a few times I've thought about it,
Yeah.
but yeah.
But even that thing, let it fall back on their heads. Have you ever? I mean, I think we've probably all thought before, like, I hope they get what's coming to them.
Now I have thought that.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever prayed it.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But I'm sure I've thought it.
I prayed that people would learn whatever lesson God needs to teach them before, whether maybe they learn it in a good way, but sometimes bad things do need to happen. Sometimes we need to reap what we sow,
So how do you respond or deal with people who are angry with you or oppose what you're doing?
For me, like my first thought, and this is not always the best thing, is like I like to be liked by people. And so if someone's upset with me for some reason, I want to like mend things. I want to reason with them, try to make it right. And the majority of the time, if someone's really upset or angry with me, no matter how much I can try to reason with them, they're probably already set in their ways. That's typically what I've found, if they're really angry. And so sometimes the next best thing, maybe avoid them or prepare yourself, kind of like they do, prepare themselves for next time, just to know, like, oh, like, well, this upsets them. And so whether it be to try to avoid doing that thing that upsets them in the future, or like here, they're not going to stop building the wall just because they're getting angry. And so, because they're also like their enemies, those are the people, obviously they're going to be making fun of them for doing this because they don't want them to be stronger. They don't want this wall to be built. And so I may be doing something that I know is right or that's good or that I feel like God is calling me to. And even though someone might be opposed to that, that doesn't mean I just roll over because I'm trying to please them. But I might go about it showing differently or doing things a little differently. Not so much to appease them, but to protect what I'm trying to get done.
Sheryl, how do you deal with people?
well, him saying protecting what he's trying to get done kind of ties into what I'm thinking about. Is that I think like you have to remind yourself of the purpose of what you're doing when you are experiencing opposition, which I think he does here. And that drives you forward. But I think when you're dealing with people who are opposing you, sometimes it can be miscommunication. Sometimes it can be lack of knowledge. Sometimes it can be something that's happened prior that you have absolutely no knowledge of that has got somebody really upset.
Most of the time
Sometimes it's
that is
fear,
true.
you know, which in their case is a lot of what's going
Mhm.
on. the fear of how powerful are they going to be if they
Right.
actually unite at this point
Yeah,
and
they
have
won't have somebody to
protection.
bully anymore
That's
once
right.
once they get walls built.
Mm-hmm.
Anger and opposition, I handle differently. Anger, I will respond in one of two ways. Either if you're torturing me, I'm going to torture you back. Like that's a response. Or if it's from somebody that is extremely out of character, I'll often try to just pause and say, "Hey, what's this about?" But anger is, for me, like anger doesn't. It's not typically a frustrating thing for me because I can get hot and be over it,
Mm-hmm.
and so I don't think about it in those terms. If somebody gets mad, most of the time when people are mad, though, there's something else going on.
Yeah.
Most of the time, there's something else going on. You just can't see it. Opposition, though, most of the time I ignore it. That's what I would say. Most of the time I'm just like, whatever. You it's your problem, not mine. I just don't even deal with it. If it is a critical relationship, then I try to reason it out. If it's a situation where, all right, I need you to be able to pull this off, I'm going to try to talk through it with you. But if it's just somebody being petty, and a lot of this is what I consider to be petty opposition, um, like who cares? It's not even if the wall stands or it don't stand. It's not going to affect them one way or the other. They're on the outside. They're outsiders. It's not their town, their city. It's not even their wall, but they're over here ridiculing, opposing, and like that. Lord, I hope it always stays this way. But most of the opposition, like as a church or as a pastor that I experience, comes outside, not inside.
Mm-hmm.
We have been extremely fortunate not to have significant opposition internally. Like we've been in the church world, it's a relatively smooth sailing situation. Most of the, and sometimes somebody from the outside will approach me or call me, and I'll go, in my mind, I'm thinking, why does this matter to you?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like why do you care? You, if you don't want to do it, then don't do it. I'm not making you, this is our thing. And it's not like it's heresy most of the time or something like that. It's just, why do you do X? And I think for me, anger and opposition, I handle differently. If I'm a fight fire with fire kind of person often when it comes to anger. Like, so if you're coming at me with a torch, like I got one, I'm going to torch back, so that's often how I respond. That's not always healthy. I'm not saying that's right, but
Right.
like the anger doesn't just throw me off. Opposition, on the other hand, if I believe that you are reasonable, you have a reason, and what you're saying matters, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to try to reason it out. But
I think you should make the peace when you can in a situation, but then I think you shouldn't let opposition keep you from completing a task.
you can't.
No.
Because it's never going to be done to everybody's
Mm-mm.
expectations, make them happy. It's just not. That's not even realistic. Even in your homes, it doesn't work that way. There's
Oh no! If everybody had to be pleased at home with everything I did, I wouldn't get much done.
right. Or if you had to
Much
be pleased with
completed.
everything they did,
That's right.
you just have to say, okay,
Yep.
this is we're going to live with this and we're going to move on.
Mhm.
And I recognize, there are things like I'll hear there are people that around, and they may have a certain personality trait or a way they talk about things or deal with things, and other people will deal with that person. They go, oh my God, don't that get on your nerves? No, at this point I've tuned it out. Like I've deciphered like this is who they are. Like I can't let those things throw me off
Mhm.
always if they do, because I mean, um, you just know who they are. Yeah. So, where are some places that you struggle with opposition? I know Zach probably more than me and you struggles with opposition. He's crying over there already.
I am crying. Sorry.
Oh.
He's coughing.
Excuse me. I just got over a sickness and my throat is killing me. But from the devil. But in terms of opposition, I think like I. I'm much better than I used to be, but I used to be very easily, I guess, like easily offended. I used to think that people were against me, like just naturally just assume like, oh, like they're a little slightly critical of me. They must hate me.
I
Like,
know people like that.
oh, yes, yeah.
Yes.
Well,
Yes, I know a lot
It
of people
drives
like
me
that.
crazy
Yeah.
for them.
Well, and I think like too, like that's just like how I think I don't know if it has to do with how I was raised or just like the way I was before,
Yeah.
but that's just like how I always used to be. And it's just such an unhealthy way to live because not everybody thinks they're your enemy, you know. Some people genuinely want to help you, you know, and there's like constructive criticism. And sometimes like here, they're not criticizing you because they want them to build it. They're not being like trying to encourage them like, "Oh, you got to build this better." So like if a fox happens
Right.
to run
Let
your
me
wall.
show you how to make it better.
Yes.
There's none of that going
They
on.
don't want that. They're purposefully trying to discourage them.
Mhm.
And so whether someone, instead of looking at it like, oh, everyone's my enemy, sure, there will be some people that will oppose you and purposefully try to get you down to the point where you don't continue or things you do stop what you're doing. But if you just ignore it or if you just decide, if you know what you're doing is right, stop caring about what they're thinking. Stop caring about it. I think that's like I've moved more in that direction now, where I try to let it fester or they're pestering fester, you know, and just just look to God and just be like, if you want me to do this, then give me the strength to do it and to continue on no matter what.
Let me ask a question as a follow-up to what you were just saying, and we acknowledged it. I know people who, at the least amount of opposition, think people don't like them,
Mhm.
or they're critical of
It's
one
personal.
thing they do. Yeah, everything
Yeah.
becomes personal.
Right.
And I take very little personal.
Mhm.
Like you don't like my shoes. Well, first of all, that's your problem. That's the first. That's the first way I see it. But it don't mean you don't like me.
Right.
I don't even think that way. You just don't like the shoes I like, and I'm good with that. But everybody's not.
Mhm.
So what do you tell the person who takes everything personally? Like every opposition, every piece of conflict is like the end all for the whole world. What would you tell that person?
It's hard because their logic is totally different from mine, and it's hard because I know I'm close to somebody who is like that, and it's really hard for me to try to talk them through that because I don't process things like that at all. To the point that because when you're talking about opposition, I thought, well, like I can't even come up with a situation where I feel like a person is opposed to me because not because there aren't any people, but because I think I pay so little attention to it. I give it so little value in my life that I'm not even aware of it.
Right.
To me, it always feels more like situational opposition,
Yeah.
or circumstances. That to me feels more like something I feel like I'm more aware of in my life. But I think you have to what I try to do with this person is remind that person, this is not true and you know who you are. And if that person has any clue who you are and knows you well enough, then they know that they love you and they trust you. It's not, every little thing that somebody's going to pick apart about you doesn't mean that they hate you and they oppose you and they're against everything that you do. That you're not like, who could despise you?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's heartbreaking when you're close to somebody who feels that way because it would be so much to walk around with, I think.
And even further, I'll see people. So they talk about how they do something. Somebody will, and I'll know people who will see them talking about that, and they just think they're better than everybody else because they don't do the same thing. I'll give you an example.
Same way, you mean?
That's right. I'll give you an example. So you homeschooled your kids. You were a homeschooled kid. Darnell back here was a homeschool kid, but I didn't homeschool my kids. And there are multiple reasons for that. I did homeschool Cameron 1 year out of necessity, not because that was what I wanted to do. But I know people that if you were to talk about homeschooling, they would go, "Oh, you think you're better than me, because you can, you."
Which we are, but
right. But they take it that way, and I don't. Like, okay, this is your choice.
No.
And this was my choice, and I don't know that one is better than the other.
No.
It's often circumstantial and personal. You have a temperament,
and it was for us,
right? You have a temperament that might work better than my temperament. I mean, can you imagine me dragging my kids around the country, full speed like I go schooling them? It would be difficult. I would try it. I could do it better now than I could have when I was 30.
Yeah.
When I had my first kid, I was 21. So when I was 25, 30 years old, nobody wanted to learn from me. I was
I've
stupid.
made plenty of mistakes. Don't you worry.
But they see you doing something, and they think by you saying that, you think you're better than
Or
them.
even just by me doing it.
That's right.
That because they're not doing it the same way that I look down on the way that they do.
That's
it.
exactly right.
That's
and
right.
I don't even understand that concept.
No,
I don't know how
either.
people think that way, because I don't think that way. If you want to do it your way, that's fine. I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm comfortable enough, and I'm going to do it my way. It is. And when I try to get out of my comfortableness, I'm miserable.
We're all different, and like with the homeschooling example, our kids are different. There are some kids who would do very well and thrive in that environment, and some kids who would not. And so I don't think there's like
And
one,
parents.
and parents as well.
Yeah.
It's
I was
just as much-
homeschooled, but I don't know if I'd be good at homeschooling my kids.
It would be entertaining.
Well, I'd make little monsters. I don't know. I don't trust
Yeah.
myself to do that.
Now that should be a YouTube channel.
That would be a
You
fun YouTube
homeschooling?
channel.
I
Oh
would-
God.
I would
Yeah.
pay for that. Yeah. This is how you use a bidet.
Oh God. Have we
Potty
talked about that on the
training-
podcast?
potty training
Bidets the best.
101.
Oh yes, we have talked about bidets.
Yeah.
Just don't drink from them. But I will say that we're all made different. We like clearly we're all different, and so there are different things that work for different people. Sort of on the example you guys were talking about. I was recently in a room with a lot of other youth pastors and youth leaders, and I chose not to speak up at all. And if you know me, I really enjoy talking a lot. But I could just tell that, like, if I talked about the way that I do youth group,
You were the bad guy in the room.
I would have been the bad guy. in the
Oh,
room.
you were
I
the bad
knew-
guy in the room.
I
You were just
knew.
being there. You were the bad guy in the room.
Well, I was just being very, very careful about. I don't think I talked at all, really, just because I knew, like, if I say something, I know people are going to be. They could be on me, about it.
They only want you for the kids that you'll bring. They don't want you for your opinions and the way you do things.
That
can
is
relate to
sometimes the
that.
case. Yeah.
I know. I sit around those
Yeah.
tables.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's an unfortunate thing, but
Yeah, bring your checkbook, but just don't
But
tell
guess
us
what?
to do.
If you
Yeah.
were Nehemiah
yeah,
and you had have let that take you down, then the wall would not have been
yeah,
built.
no, exactly.
I mean,
That's right.
the people who oppose him, that wasn't their purpose. Their purpose was not to have to get that wall built, but his was.
Yes,
And he just had to move on with
That's
what
right.
had to be
You
done.
do your thing. I'm gonna do mine. I ain't gonna stress about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
He would have just continued the wall having been in destruction and one more failed attempt
Right.
to do anything about it. One more generation of people who had come back there and felt like they had the inability, they had no ability to rebuild the wall.
And the example that you're using, I don't know what room you were in. I can guess, but I don't know what room you were in. But I can hear, what you're doing is going to fall apart. I can hear in their mind, it's so weak, it's watered down. You're not preaching the gospel. Why do you, kids, Jesus didn't play games.
heard that one a few times. Yes, yeah.
I get it. And you just have to say, okay, I got more important things to do than to sit here and debate with you about whether you're smarter than I am.
Mhm.
If you're so smart, go figure it out yourself. That's the way I see it. All right, let's close this up. Thank you all for joining us today on One Single Story. I hope you'll be back tomorrow as we continue our conversation in the book of Nehemiah.